Welcome. My name is Jose Melendez, Campaign Director for the Taxpayer Protection Project here at TPPF, and today we're talking about taxpayer empowerment. Many of the tax reform ideas that come before the legislature stem from local government waste and abuse. For several sessions, the state legislature has worked to lower your taxes by passing tax relief measures down to our local governments. Yet your tax bills continue to go up. Let's figure out why. On that note, I'm delighted to introduce my guest, a defender of liberty, Representative Cody Vasut. Representative Vasut, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
So, Representative Vasut, you have a very unique voice in that before serving in the state house, you served in your local city council, so the city of Angleton. And so you bring a very important voice to this subject matter that we're going to be discussing today. But before we get into that, I wanted to kick off with, what are you hearing from constituents? What is at the forefront right now for them back home?
Well, property taxes are always perhaps the number one issue besides the border that I hear about. And I don't really hear that much about the border anymore now that we have President Trump in office and a secure border, right? So property taxes are certainly at top of mind. I will say that I usually hear about property taxes a lot more from individuals in April and May when those appraisal notices go out. And then we're constantly reminding everyone, protest your appraisals. And then when it comes time now for rate settings, go to your city councils so that they hear from you. But I don't hear from them that much. And, we had some legislation today in the Ways and Means Committee that's trying to address that, maybe giving more notice, more information to taxpayers so that their antennas will be up when it comes to rate setting. But I would say what I'm hearing the most, property taxes always.
So on that note, let's go ahead and shift gears into the legislature. You mentioned a bill was being considered today in committee that would be Senate Bill 10, which would lower the voter approval tax rate.
Yes.
Why is that important?
Well, Senate Bill 10 is another measure that is about empowering Texans, Texas voters, to be able to step in and say, well, that's a little bit too high of an increase. So what it is, it's not a cap on local governments. The bill only applies to governments over 75,000. What it does is it lowers the voter approval rate for only those cities and counties, and I think maybe some other entities from 3.5% to 2.5%. And what it says is if you go over 2.5%, you have to go to the voters. It's not that you can't. You just have to go to the voters and get them to weigh in. So I always view it as a trigger, not a cap. That's what Senate Bill 10 does. And it's important for voters because anytime we can increase voter participation in the property tax system, we maximize the chance that any government, no matter who it is going to be more fiscally responsible and more responsive to the citizens.
So I have two additional follow-up questions. Number one, a voter approval tax rate election, or better known as a VATER, have you ever caught wind of one actually not failing here in the state of Texas?
But that was the question I had in committee. A lot of the concerns that are raised by local governments, often when you have anything to do with the rate, is that the impact it'll have on public safety. And I asked, has a VATER election ever failed on a public safety issue? And no one had a specific example. Some brought back some questions or some comments, but maybe, the approval of an ESD budget, right? I don't know if that's the same thing or not, but I've never personally ever experienced a VATER for public health and safety failing before. And really, I will say this about my locals. They do a pretty decent job of going close to the no new revenue rate or under the voter approval rate. And so I've not really had VATERs in my neck of the woods. And so I would say I'm not aware of situations where VATERs are rejected for critical reasons. And so I just don't see that being a concern that would make this bill be bad. I think it's a great bill.
So staying on Senate Bill 10, a very important measure, do you think that's enough? When I think about what happened during the regular session, we passed a $10 billion tax cut, but almost before the ink was even dry on the bill, local governments intercepted that. We had bond elections, spending sprees. Do you think there's other reforms out there that we need to be looking at ahead of the 90th legislature?
I always think that property tax reform, relief, elimination should be on the agenda. Where I think that SB 10 is a step in a positive direction, of course. I think that we perhaps need to look at the system as a whole. I think comprehensively. I think the locals are right to say, well, you set the framework, legislature, you set the framework, and we do. And I think, therefore, it's the responsibility of the legislature to take a look at the system. And if there is a way to reform it, to modify it, to eliminate it, and replace it with a consumption tax system, I think all of the above should be discussed and discussed robustly. So do I think it's enough? No. Do I think it's a step in the right direction? Yes. And I think the better direction is to even go beyond just talking about the rate side, but also the system as a whole.
So the state of Texas observes constitutional and statutory spending limits.
Yeah.
Local governments do not. Do you think this is a problem?
Well, I think it certainly can be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
There are some local governments that do have some spending limits, but most of them, like you said, don't. And when we think about how much our property taxes are, obviously the revenue side of the equation is one thing, but what drives the revenue a lot of times is spending. Mm-hmm. And if the people of Texas in the Constitution and through its legislative representatives in statute have said, look, the sum of population and inflation growth is the target, and if you're going to go above that, you either have to have a supermajority vote or there's other constitutional spending limits like pay-as-you-go that we can't go beyond. I think it's goose and gander, right? If it's good for the state, it ought to be good for the locals. And I don't know exactly what the best spending limit is for a local government. It's a little bit of a different animal than the state government, but I think certainly some type of spending limit at the local level is a prudent and good thing to do.
So local debt across all local jurisdictions here in Texas is set to eclipse $500 billion.
Mm-hmm.
One of the issues we're running into is how do we address this, right? One of the constant concerns of taxpayers is local debt. Is there a solution there? Is there issues we need to be looking at?
Well, I think the debt side of the equation is always to be discussed. We had some legislation in the regular session that we were considering in Ways and Means, whether or not you do a cap on the amount of debt that can be issued. That's one option. Another option is, you limit what type of debt can be issued without voter approval. That's the CO reform. Certificate of obligation is CO. And that's one other alternative. You can maybe combine those together and say, look, local governments cannot issue new debt beyond a certain percentage without a unanimous approval of their council, or in some cases going to their voters. I think incentivizing local governments not to go out for local debt for issues that really don't fit within the core role of government is always a good thing. I think constraining debt is a good thing. I think there's a balance to be reached between whether or not the debt is for roads or other projects or otherwise, right? So there's probably some middle ground to do, but I think it needs to be an item to discuss and something to be addressed next session.
As a follow-up, do we need to do a better job of holding bond elections? A lot of these bonds usually pass in May of an odd year. Is there a different date, or is there a better way that we can communicate these bonds?
I certainly think that considering moving bonds to November is something to look at. I've seen different research on that one, that there's certainly higher voter participation in November. Nobody disputes that. Mm-hmm. Does higher voter participation result in bonds failing? It might. It certainly puts it top of mind to voters. And I think that's a good thing, right? Because when you're going to be issuing this much debt, having the buy-in from the people and that they know going in, that's a good thing, rather than having 1% of the people in a May election approve the bond debt. You could look at the bond proposition. We did some revisions this session on that. We changed the font that had to be used. A lot of the locals complain about that this is a tax increase, and they say it's not. Well, it absolutely is. Mm. Every bond, no matter what, is a tax increase.
That's right.
Period. That's what bonds are. Because if you didn't issue the debt, then you would be able to lower your tax rate. It is always, just as a matter of law, a tax increase. The question, and what I mention to my voters oftentimes is this a tax increase that's justified? And that, I think, goes to what is the bond for and what do the people think about it, and why maybe moving the bond elections to November is a good idea, because more people get to weigh in on whether it's a good idea or not.
Let's talk about citizen engagement here for a little bit. So to affect change, we need more folks involved at the local level. How would you advise your constituents on engaging local governments?
Oh, man. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, I hear from my constituents a lot come appraisal time. And we've thought about why is that. It might be that they receive notices in the mail with their appraisal, and that gets their attention up, and it has an estimate of what your taxes may be. Of course, those are just pure estimates because the local governments haven't set your rates. But that gets their attention. That gets their involvement, and they get engaged. They go and protest, and they maybe reach out to me. They reach out to the local officials. Oftentimes, the local officials say, well, it's your appraisal. I can't do anything about it. The best thing that they can do locally is to be involved not only at the appraisal time, but to be involved at the budget setting and rate setting time. Go to your city council meetings. I don't hold to the view that every single time the local government increases your taxes even $1 that it's always bad. There might be a good reason, but you won't know that to be able to evaluate that if you don't show up. Because if you don't show up, they'll just keep raising it whatever they want for whatever reason they want, and there won't be any accountability. So, number one thing, show up at your city council meetings. Number two, participate in the legislative process, make your voice heard to better this system that favor taxpayers, because ultimately we shouldn't be doing things that are just best for cities or for counties or even the state legislature, but what is best for taxpayers ultimately needs to drive the conversation, and the only way to make those decisions is if the taxpayers are involved in the conversation.
Final question. So local governments spend millions of dollars on contract lobbyists who then turn around and lobby the state legislature, typically against our values. Do you think that's a good return on investment for taxpayers?
No. No, not even $1 should be spent on taxpayer-funded lobbying. And taxpayer-funded lobbying, look, is mostly done by large cities and counties in conflict with and sometimes to the detriment of small counties and cities. A lot of my cities will get the line from their organizations that, look, you're taking away, you don't want to hear from us. That's not true. In fact, if we banned taxpayer-funded lobbying, we would level the playing field between small and large cities, small and large counties, to where everyone had to go speak to their legislator. And guess what? That's the way it should be. I should hear from my locals, and I do. I talk to them. They text me. I hear from them often. I meet with them before session. They have an active line of communication with me on any bill. I'd love to hear from them. I don't need, and frankly, in my practice so far, I haven't seen a taxpayer-funded lobbyist. I've seen them. So there are taxpayer-funded lobbyists, though. They're talking to somebody. I don't know if that's even effective, and they're certainly wasting a lot of money against the interests of taxpayers doing it. So we need to ban that practice. I think we have the votes to do it. I think it's past time that we ban taxpayer-funded lobbying, and I hope we get it done soon.
Well, Representative Vasut, thank you for being a taxpayer champion, and thank you for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.